Dotun, this is a story of the biggest cricket stadium in the world, a case of mistaken identity, and a Marvel comic superhero actor being confused with a historian by nigh on continent of 1.3 billion people. What it's about is that this biggest cricket stadium in the world, where England played India just a short while ago with a pink ball test match, is used to be called the Motera Stadium and was just recently named the Narendra Modi Stadium after India's Prime Minister. Now, there's an author and a historian and a cricketer actually called Tom Holland, and he happened to tweet after this, "I'm a huge admirer of the modesty Modi showed in naming the world's largest cricket stadium after himself." Now, he did that, and then he followed it up with, "Not always a good sign for countries when leaders started pulling that trick." These were two tweets, and this didn't go unnoticed because, first of all, Indians get very uppity about any kind of criticism or attack on the country. But secondly, they're quite sensational, and they mistakenly thought that the Tom Holland author, historian, cricketer who had tweeted was none other than Tom Holland, the actor, who plays the web-crawling superhero of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, better known as Spider-Man. So they went sort of completely gaga over this, and they said through Twitter, "We are going to teach him the lesson of a lifetime. Holland is he's behaved seditiously. We're going to boycott the next Spider-Man movie due at the end of the year, and we're going to cancel Tom Holland." Now, the real actor Tom Holland kept a sort of dignified silence. And what the author and historian Tom Holland did, I think slightly with his tail between his legs, because he probably didn't anticipate the kind of furore he'd set off, he tweeted for a final time, at least so far, to say, "Oh dear, I seem single-handedly to have destroyed the prospects for the next Spider-Man movie in India."
A web of confusion, then.
Ah, very good, Dotun. Very good. I saw what you did there.
It took me a while to come up with that one, but thank you for giving me the opportunity. Why has the Prime Minister named this stadium after himself? What's the logic in it? And do Indians approve of it?
The Prime Minister is leading the most popular government in the country and has been for a long time now. So clearly he has his following. And he's not a shy guy, in that he's got something in common with one former American president who's still very much in the news. And that's why they're very good friends, I suppose. So he's quite fond of naming things after himself. It's also a strategic move because bringing the limelight to himself removes the limelight from opposition parties or any other historical figure, because, in fact, the stadium was previously named after a historical figure who was very closely linked to what is now the opposition Congress Party. So it's a very strategic and cunning move on the part of the Modi inner circle.
And if I go to India, will I drive down the Narendra Modi highway? Will I arrive at the Narendra Modi airport? How many other Narendra Modi landmarks are there? Do you know?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, Dotun, but I can tell you that they are increasing by the month. And it is a kind of thing in India, actually, statues and naming things, erecting statues according to who's in power or who's the governor of a state and who's in power is very much an Indian thing. So it really depends who's in fashion and who's in power. Maybe one day we'll see a statue erected to Dotun Adebayo. Why not?
I doubt it. But I hope that there are at least some landmarks dedicated to the late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. I remember in the 1960s and 1970s, thinking that India was a very forward-thinking country. It had a female prime minister. We hadn't had one at that point. And she was spectacular as well, stunning. Every time you saw her, she was dressed in a sari. She really was an iconic figure in world politics, and a very strong one, as I recall. Of course, that ended in tragedy when she was assassinated. But are there landmarks to not just Indira Gandhi, but any other prominent women in India?
Yes, Indira Gandhi, definitely. In fact, I wrote a biography, the first international biography, if I say so myself, of her daughter-in-law, which included a lot about her, Sonia Gandhi. And Gandhi learnt how to become one of the most powerful women in the world at Indira Gandhi's feet. Indira Gandhi was a consummate politician. And in terms of what she's got named after her, there's lots of places, airports, there are statues around, there are streets. And the house where she lived is now a museum. You can go around, and a lot of it is kept as it was, but rather gruesomely, the actual place where she was assassinated has been preserved as well by her daughter-in-law, Sonia, and you can actually still see the bloodstains there when she was shot by her own Sikh bodyguards in 1984. But there is a very famous state governor in India, and she's Mayawati, and she's extremely fond of having statues built to her. So everywhere you go, you see statues of Mayawati, and people give her, people often present garlands of flowers. In the case of Mayawati, when you go and greet her, you'll give her, if you're so inclined and if you have the pocket, you'll give her a garland of maybe gold coins and things. So reticence and shyness is not a hallmark of most Indian politicians, quite the reverse.
And yet, even though India hosted the most powerful woman in the world of her generation, certainly in Mrs. Gandhi, there are still so many issues that we've talked about women in South Asia, so many issues of inequality and worse, if it can get much worse. Ahead of International Women's Week, will it be one to remember for women in India? What are the issues that they're currently having to battle with?
Yes, thank you for doing that link so nicely, because it is a very sobering moment, really. It's highlighted in a way by the fact that there's this film that's been brought out, which is on one of the Indian streaming platforms, not one of the giants, by a director called Jeo Baby. And it's called The Great Indian Kitchen. And most of the action is set in this dark, grimy little kitchen, and it's all about equality and gender stereotypes. And the reason it came about was because when Jeo Baby says in interviews that he has always had a sort of gender neutral attitude and believes in equality in the home. And when he got married, that was a real chance for him to sort of put it into action, if you like. And so he started to spend a lot of time in the kitchen when he got married. And then he found that it wasn't always the most wonderful, stimulating, creative environment in the world for him. I mean, I'm sure consummate chefs would say differently, but he got really bored, and he found it quite a drudge sometimes. And he said, wow, if women have to do this, which they do have to do a lot, not just in India and South Asia, but around the world, he said, it's like being in jail. Men make all the decisions here, and women are just like unpaid workers. So I want to make a film about traditional women's roles. So he consulted his wife, who he made creative head of the film, and he devised a plot whereby a woman marries a conventional school teacher from a very conservative Hindu family. She's not allowed to get a job, and they set up home together. And then, lo and behold, she gets pregnant. The mother-in-law moves in and shoves the daughter-in-law into the kitchen, where she spends most of her time cooking, washing, mopping, and being a bit of a drudge. And the husband becomes more and more sort of so-called, in inverted commas, spiritual and extreme. He goes in for a period of celibacy, and leans more towards what he thinks is religion. And one of the habits that's brought out in the film is that he refuses to eat food made by his wife at a certain time of the month. Now, the wife gets thoroughly fed up with all of this. She used to like dance and be quite an independent, free-spirited woman. So she leaves, she packs her bag, she goes back to her own parents and trains to become a dance teacher, which was one of her own ambitions. Soon she's independent, she's doing very well, she buys her own car. And one day on a whim, she goes back and visits her ex-husband. And lo and behold, he's got a second wife. And the second wife is suffering the same fate that the first wife would have done had she stayed. So Geo Baby, the director, is saying, hey, women, get out of the trap. You don't have to live like this. Do what you enjoy doing. Please live a life. And it was quite a stark film that's received rave reviews and found a real resonance with the intelligentsia up and down the country, and sort of people watching outside as well. So I actually consulted an Indian luminary, Harsaran Pandey, who's an Indian social commentator. She's currently consultant to the World Health Organization. She's held a top post with them, where she was looking after 11 countries. And she says hurrah to the champions of women, but she also presents a very clear-eyed, stark view of what's really happening for women.
Make no mistakes. Contrary to the numerous films, TV debates, intellectual discussions on women's issues in India, the gender lines are still carved in rock. As women from cities and small town India strike for financial independence, I say hurrah. But within most marriages, the wife's role still is that of the prime domestic worker, which remains unremarked and thankless. And actual data on changes to gender stereotypical domestic roles remains marginal and totally insignificant. Lockdown actually demonstrated the huge workload carried by women when without maids, all families had to do everything. Some cases, the men helped out, and in others, they expected the women to do all the work. For centuries, men have enjoyed the established patriarchal privilege roles, and they're not ready to give this up. Women too have been socialized to sacrifice and slog for the family. But isn't that the same across the world? What of the ideal American mom baking pies and casseroles? What about women from other Western countries and South Asian and Middle Eastern countries? It is the same. So are we really that much different?
I was quite surprised to hear this from Harsaran Pandey, because she's a very modern woman from an untraditional kind of life, really. And to hear her say this, when we also talk about so many progressive women, you've mentioned Indira Gandhi, who made it in a man's world, and so many others around the world, it's quite sobering as we get closer to International Women's Day to hear this from Harsaran Pandey. And linked to that, Dotun, I'd like to discuss an initiative by the BBC. It's not the BBC praising the BBC. It's just a really interesting initiative I found, which is also on International Women's Day on Sunday, the 8th of March. The BBC is going to announce the Indian Sportswoman of the Year award. The nominees have been chosen by expert writers, sports journalists, and experts across India, and the fans and the public have been voting. Voting's now closed. The 5 nominees consist of an airgun shooter, a hockey captain, a wrestler, a sprinter, and a chess champion. But what I found amongst these girls, mainly, apart from the chess champion, and other Indian athletes and Olympians I've interviewed going back quite a few years, is that many of them are from very, very poor, underprivileged backgrounds. It's amazing the way they sort of make it through sheer grit and determination, because India doesn't have the infrastructure that Great Britain, European countries, and especially America, Australia, South Africa has. The support it gives its sportsmen. India doesn't have anything like that. And so for these people to still make it, whether they're men or women, is really quite something. So I'll pick out three of the 5 nominees for you, if I may. One of them is Duti Chand. She's one of the fastest sprinters in South Asia, and she's the 100 meters national champion. She is the first openly gay athlete in India, and she came from such a poor family. When she was a child and training, she had no shoes, there was no track to run on, and she couldn't even get a coach. She trained herself for a long time, and she wanted to study as well as run. So she decided that she would earn money through running to support her studies, and she trains really hard. She trains 6 times a day. But sometimes when she went to an event, Dotun, she had so little money, she used to sleep on a railway platform because she couldn't afford to stay in a hotel. And then there's Kinesh Forgat, who's a wrestler. Now, she's interesting. She also comes from a village, so quite a poor upbringing again. But in this village, in her family, there's a strong tradition of wrestling. And in her family in particular, the girls are taught to wrestle exactly the same time as the boys. And Kinesh was spotted as somebody with real talent, and she was encouraged. But the conservative society around her still leveled a lot of criticism at her widowed mother. You know, of course, being a wrestler, she would have to wear shorts for fighting and training. And they said, tut, 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 you mustn't let your daughter wear shorts. And her widow mother was told to make the daughter give up sport because she wouldn't be able to earn any money from it and become a sort of laborer like her mother. But the mother had a lot of chutzpah, and she said, nothing doing. My girl is going to do what she wants. She's going to become a wrestling champion, and so she has. And so she's really changed the culture in that village because, you know, often around South Asia, if it's a girl baby, people still say it's not as good as having a boy baby. But in this particular village, when girl babies are born, the entire village says, hurrah! And they say it's a really good thing because now these girls will become wrestlers and do really well. The third person I want to talk to you about is Koneru Hampi. Now, she came from a more kind of middle-class family. Her dad is progressive, and was a chess player. And he wanted his daughter to undergo the same sort of training and aspirations as any other chess player in the world. So first of all, he called her Hampi, and it's spelled Hampi, which means champion. You know, you are what you're called very often. I know you've had a program about that a little while ago. At that time, mainly it was the Russians who were winning all the tournaments at chess, and of course, many of their names end in Y, don't they? Somebody Ski or whatever. And so instead of spelling her name Hampi, he changed it to Hampy, and he told his daughter, you are going to be as good as any Russian player in the world, if not better. And so she did indeed become at 15 the youngest woman grandmaster in the world, and she's currently the women's world rapid chess champion. So she's done well. So what good is this award going to do, you may ask, Dotun? Well, I'll tell you, I think, you know, the way it's being rolled out, the BBC is investing a lot of money in India. It's going into all the Indian language websites and BBC Sport. And so there's going to be a big online awareness of it. And I think it will give motivation and encouragement to other women and girls in sport in India and South Asia. And they're going to try and increase the sort of online awareness of women sports people in India by having multilingual and multimedia journalists, Indian students, to go out and search for all sorts of Indian sports aspirants and to add them to Wikipedia. So I think it may be interesting to see the outcome.
What's going on in Myanmar?
Yes. Now, the background to what's been happening in Myanmar is that there was an election in November, just to bring listeners up to date. The previous governing party had been run by Aung San Suu Kyi, and it was the National League for Democracy Party. So it was, in theory, quite democratic, although the military still had a hold on much of the country and much of Parliament. But the Democrats won by a huge landslide, around 80%, and the military-backed opposition didn't like this. And so what happened was that on the 1st of February, the military staged a big coup. The Democratic political leaders were mostly put under house arrest or jailed. Aung San Suu Kyi was sort of disappeared. Nobody really knows where she is, and her own lawyer can't reach her. And immediately there was an uprising. There were peaceful protests organized by different sectors of society, like doctors and engineers and farmers, because they remember that Myanmar had 50 years of military rule, and they did not want to go back to that situation. But the military's been getting more and more aggressive with the protesters. And then just a few days ago, Myanmar's ambassador to the UN actually pleaded for the international community to help remove the military from power, and said that no one should cooperate with the military until power is handed back to the democratically elected government. And he asked the international community to use any means necessary to take action and restore democracy. And he ended his speech by holding up three fingers, which was the call sign of the protesters. The three-finger salute has been taken from the popular series Game of Thrones, and that's their call sign. Now, he was fired within 24 hours, and the country was told by state television for betraying, in inverted commas, for betraying his country and abusing the power. And all his responsibility was taken away from him. And then straight after that, there's been a dramatic upsurge in the violence against the protesters. And the Human Rights Organization has been saying that just not long ago, 18 were killed and about 30 injured. So not to speak of the 800 arrests that have been there. There's water cannon, there's live bullets, stun grenade, tear gas on the streets. And people are very, very concerned now, very concerned indeed. And doctors who've been peacefully protesting on the streets find that they're having to take themselves out of the protests and go and be in the hospitals and attend to all the injured who are coming in rapidly.